The twin suns of Kepler-7 blazed mercilessly across the rust-colored landscape, casting long shadows between the scattered buildings of Outpost Haven. Jackson Reed wiped sweat from his forehead with a grease-stained cloth, the familiar weight of his plasma torch comfortable in his weathered hands. His repair bay, converted from an old cargo hauler, had seen better decades, but it was home. The steady hum of fusion welders and the occasional curse word filled the afternoon air as he worked on a damaged atmospheric processor for one of the local terraforming crews. Credits were always tight this far from civilization, but Jackson had learned that survival on the rim meant fixing whatever walked through his door. The sound of boots on metal grating made him glance up from his work. Through the heat shimmer, a figure approached. Tall, graceful, and definitely not local. The stranger wore armor unlike anything he'd encountered in 20 years of frontier living. The suit flowed like liquid mercury, its organic curves now scorched and battle-damaged. Microfractures spider-webbed across the chest plate, and the helmet's visor flickered with failing power indicators. Whoever this was had been through hell recently. "You the tech?" The voice was unmistakably feminine, carrying an accent Jackson couldn't place. Refined, almost musical, but with an underlying authority that made him straighten unconsciously. Depends who's asking. Jackson set down his tools, taking in the damage patterns. Energy weapon burns, kinetic impacts, and what looked like atmospheric re-entry scoring. "But yeah, I fix things. Question is whether you can pay for work like this." The woman reached into a concealed compartment and produced a small crystalline chip that caught the sunlight like captured fire. Jackson's breath caught. He'd seen enough rare materials to recognize processed quantium when he saw it. That little crystal was worth more than his shop made in 5 years. "Will this suffice?" she asked. "I'd say that covers it and then some." Jackson tried to keep his expression neutral. "Name's Jackson Reed. And you are?" There was a pause, brief but noticeable. "Call me Sella." "All right, Sella. Let's see what we're working with here." He gestured toward the raised platform that served as his primary workspace. "Looks like you've been through a war zone." "Something like that," she replied, beginning to remove sections of her armor with practiced efficiency. Beneath the outer plating, Jackson could see an intricate network of power conduits and neural interfaces. Technology far beyond anything produced in this sector. "This is military grade," he observed, running his scanner over the components. "High-end stuff. What's someone with gear like this doing on a backwater rock like Kepler-7? Sela's hand stilled for a moment. "Wrong place, wrong time. Bad luck." Jackson chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Yeah, I know that feeling. This planet's got a way of collecting strays." He began cataloging the damage on his tablet. "Power core's running at maybe 30% efficiency. You've got hairline fractures in the primary support matrix and your environmental systems are completely shot. How long have you been running on backup life support?" 4 days. 4 days? Jackson looked up sharply. "Lady, you should be dead. This suit's been holding together through sheer stubborn will." For the first time since she'd arrived, Sella's posture relaxed slightly. "Stubborn will. Yes, I suppose that describes it perfectly." As Jackson began the delicate work of disassembling her armor, he found himself stealing glances at his mysterious client. There was something about her, the way she carried herself, the careful way she spoke, the unconscious authority in her bearing that suggested she was far more than she appeared. But everyone who ended up on Kepler-7 was running from something. That was the unspoken rule of the Rim. You didn't ask too many questions about the past. The work was intricate, requiring steady hands and patience. Each component had to be carefully removed, cataloged, and assessed for damage. As he worked, Jackson found himself falling into the familiar rhythm of his craft, the outside world fading away until there was nothing but the task at hand. "You're skilled at this," Sella observed, watching him work with what seemed like genuine interest. 25 years of practice," Jackson replied without looking up. "Started as a kid helping my uncle fix anything that broke on the colony transports. Turns out people always need things fixed, no matter how far from civilization you get." "Your uncle was a mechanic too?" Engineer, actually. Chief propulsion specialist on the UCS Endeavor. Big shot, important job, all that. There was a bitter edge to his voice. A lot of good it did him when the plasma conduits went critical. Sella was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry. Jackson shrugged, still focused on his work. Ancient history. Point is, I learned that nothing lasts forever. But everything can be fixed if you know how to look at it right. As the first sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, Sella removed the rest of her armor. Beneath it, she wore a form-fitting bodysuit that revealed her athletic build. Her skin was pale with intricate silver markings along her arms and neck that seemed to shift and flow in the dying light. Never seen markings like those before, Jackson commented, trying to keep his tone casual. They're traditional among my people. And your people would be? Another pause. Far from here. Jackson smiled to himself. Definitely running from something then. He could respect that. Well, far from here or not, your armor's going to need at least 3 days to fix properly. You got somewhere to stay? Sella looked uncertain for the first time since she'd arrived. I hadn't. That is, I wasn't planning to stay long. There's a boarding house about 6 blocks from here. Clean rooms, decent food, and old Henrik who runs it doesn't ask questions as long as you pay up front. Jackson began covering the armor, components with a tarp. Or if you're really strapped for lodging, there's a cot in the back room. I've slept there plenty of times myself. You would trust a stranger in your home? Jackson met her eyes for the first time all day, noting their unusual violet hue. Lady, you've got enough firepower in that suit to level half the settlement. If you wanted to cause trouble, you wouldn't need me to trust you first. Something in her expression shifted. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. You're not afraid of me. Should I be? Most people are. Most people haven't fixed as many broken things as I have, Jackson replied, turning back to his work. Fear's just another kind of damage, and I've always been better at fixing things than breaking them. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sella made her decision. The cot will be fine. Thank you. Don't mention it. Just part of the service. But as Jackson watched her settle into the small back room, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just invited something far more significant than a simple repair job into his life. Outside, the desert wind began to pick up, carrying with it the scent of distant storms and the promise that nothing on Kepler 7 would ever be quite the same again. Dawn crept across the horizon like molten copper, and Jackson was already 3 hours into his work when Sella emerged from the back room. She moved with fluid grace despite her injuries, and he noticed she'd braided her silver hair back from her face, revealing the elegant sweep of her neck and the intricate patterns that traced along her skin like living jewelry. Coffee's on the burner if you want some, he called without looking up from the power core he was rebuilding. Fair warning, though, it's strong enough to strip paint. Thank you. Her voice carried the rough edges of sleep, somehow making her seem more human despite her alien features. She poured herself a cup and approached his workstation, watching as he carefully realigned the crystalline matrix that served as the core's heart. Fascinating, she murmured. You're using quantum resonance to stabilize the energy flow. Most technicians would simply replace the damaged sections. Jackson paused in his work and looked at her with newfound respect. You know your way around power systems. I've had extensive training. A shadow crossed her features. Though I confess, I've never seen anyone work quite like you do. How's that? You treat each component as if it has a soul, as if you're healing it rather than simply repairing it. Jackson felt heat rise in his cheeks at the unexpected compliment. My uncle used to say that everything has a pattern, a purpose. Break the pattern, and you get malfunction. Restore it, and you get harmony. He shrugged self-consciously. Probably sounds like mystical nonsense to someone with your training. No. Sella's voice was soft, almost wondering. It sounds wise. They worked in comfortable silence after that, Sella occasionally handing him tools or holding components while he worked. Her hands were steady and sure, with long, elegant fingers that spoke of both delicate precision and surprising strength. More than once their fingers brushed as she passed him something, and Jackson found himself acutely aware of the warmth of her skin and the way her pulse seemed to quicken at the contact. The second day passed in a blur of shared tasks and growing intimacy. What had started as professional courtesy evolved into something deeper. They talked about everything and nothing, finding unexpected common ground in their love of old Earth literature and their shared appreciation for the simple beauty of a perfectly calibrated fusion reactor. By the third evening, as they put the finishing touches on her restored armor, the air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Every casual touch, every exchanged glance, was loaded with meaning neither quite dared to voice. "There," Jackson said finally, stepping back to admire their work. "Good as new. Better, maybe." Sela ran her hands over the restored armor plating, marveling at the flawless repair work. "It's beautiful. You've made it stronger than it was before. Sometimes things need to break a little before they can become what they're supposed to be." She looked at him then with an expression that made his heart race. "Is that what's happening to me?" Before he could answer, she stepped closer. Close, enough that he could smell the subtle scent of her skin, see the way her lips parted slightly as she looked up at him. The rational part of his mind reminded him that he knew nothing about her, that she was dangerous and mysterious and clearly hiding something important. But the way she was looking at him, like he was something precious and unexpected, made all of that seem irrelevant. "Sela," he whispered. And then she was kissing him, soft and urgent and desperate, like she was trying to memorize the taste of his name on her lips. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she pressed her forehead against his chest. "Should go," she said, but made no move to leave his arms. "Should and want are different things." "Yes," she agreed, her voice muffled against his shirt. "They are." But she stayed there in his embrace as the desert wind whispered secrets through the open doors. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Jackson felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Neither of them noticed the distant glint of surveillance drones gathering in the pre-dawn darkness, or the way the shadows seemed to move with purpose around the edges of the settlement. The storm that had been building since the moment Sela arrived was about to break, and it would change everything. The attack came at dawn. Jackson woke to the sound of atmospheric engines screaming overhead and the sharp crack of energy weapons discharging in the distance. Sela was already moving, her earlier peaceful contentment replaced by deadly focus as she began pulling on her restored armor with practiced efficiency. "What the hell?" Jackson started, but she cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Stay down. Don't leave the workshop." Her voice had changed completely, taking on the crisp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Whatever happens, don't get involved." "Like hell I won't. This is my town, my—" The workshop door exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Through the smoke came figures in sleek combat armor, weapons trained on Sela as she stood partially suited, her helmet still in her hands. "Your Imperial Majesty," the lead figure said, voice distorted by a modulator but clearly mocking. "The Shadow Consortium sends its regards." Sela, no, that wasn't her real name, was it? Drew herself up to her full height. Suddenly Jackson could see what he'd been blind to before, the unconscious authority, the way she moved like she expected, the universe to bend around her will, the casual familiarity with technology that could buy and sell entire star systems. "Voss," she said calmly, as if discussing the weather. "I should have expected as much, though I confess I'm surprised you found me so quickly." "Your Majesty's departure from the capital was noticed," the assassin replied. "The consortium has many friends in the Imperial Court." "Betrayed." The word hung unspoken in the air, but Jackson could see it in the sudden tension around her eyes, the way her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What do you want?" Jackson demanded, stepping protectively in front of her despite her earlier warning. "She's just passing through. She's got nothing to do with whatever political—" The assassin's weapon swung toward him, and Jackson found himself staring down the business end of a plasma rifle that could vaporize him in an instant. The human speaks, Voss observed with amusement. How quaint. Your Majesty has been slumming, I see. Leave him out of this, Sella, the Empress said sharply. Your quarrel is with me. Oh, but he's already involved, isn't he? The great Empress, Celestine Vex, ruler of the Nexarian Empire, hiding among the dregs of civilization, playing at being just another refugee. The assassin's weapon never wavered from Jackson's chest. I wonder what she promised you, little human. Power, wealth, a place in her bed? I don't know what you're talking about, Jackson said through gritted teeth. But his mind was reeling. Empress, Nexarian Empire. That wasn't just some minor system government. The Nexarian Empire controlled a third of the known galaxy. Didn't she tell you? Voss's laughter was cold and electronic. Your little refugee is the most powerful person in known space, ruler of 700 worlds, commander of fleets that could reduce entire systems to ash. The weapon moved slightly, centering on Jackson's heart. And she's been lying to you from the moment she walked through your door. Jackson felt the world tilt around him. Everything he thought he knew, every moment of connection they'd shared, every word she'd spoken, how much of it had been real? How much had been the calculated manipulation of someone born to rule? Jackson, Celestine said quietly, and there was something broken in her voice. Please, let me explain. Explain what? He turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes made her flinch. That everything you told me was a lie? That while I was falling for some fantasy about a mysterious stranger, you were laughing at the stupid human who didn't know he was talking to an empress? No. The word came out fierce and desperate. No. It wasn't like that. Nothing about what happened between us was a lie. How would I know? The hurt in his voice was raw and obvious. How would I know what's real with you? Before she could answer, the workshop filled with the whine of charging weapons. More figures had appeared in the doorway, but these wore different armor, more ornate, carrying weapons that hummed with barely contained power. Imperial Guard, one of them barked. Stand down immediately. The lead assassin spun toward the new arrivals, weapon tracking toward the nearest guard. But Celestine was already moving. Her partially donned armor didn't slow her down as she dove, rolled, and came up with a sidearm that seemed to materialize from nowhere. The plasma bolt that erupted from her weapon turned Voss into vapor before he could complete his turn. The workshop erupted into chaos. Energy bolts flew in all directions, scorching metal and setting supplies on fire. Jackson dove behind his workbench as the air filled with the acrid smell of ozone and burning plasteel. Through the mayhem, he caught glimpses of Celestine in action, and it was terrifying to behold. She moved like violence personified. Her earlier grace transformed into something lethal and precise. Every shot found its target. Every movement flowed into the next with the fluidity of someone trained from birth to kill and survive. This wasn't the woman who had shared his coffee and talked about loneliness. This was the Empress of the Nexarian Empire, and she was magnificent and terrible in equal measure. The battle lasted less than 3 minutes. When the smoke cleared, the assassins were dead or dying, and the Imperial Guards were sweeping the workshop for threats. Celestine stood in the center of it all, breathing hard but victorious, her armor splattered with blood that wasn't her own. Your Imperial Majesty, the lead guard said, dropping to one knee. We came as soon as we received your emergency beacon. The fleet is in orbit, ready to extract you. How many ships, she asked, her voice once again carrying that note of absolute authority. 57 vessels, Majesty, including the Starfire. Jackson felt his legs give out. 57 ships. A fleet capable of reducing entire planets to rubble had come looking for the woman who had spent 3 days drinking his coffee and fixing her armor in his workshop. Celestine turned toward him then, and he saw the exact moment she realized how he was looking at her. The hope in her eyes died, replaced by something that looked almost like grief. Jackson, she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. Don't. His voice was hollow. Just don't. I get it now. You're not Sella. You never were Sella. You're something so far above me that I can't even comprehend it. That's not true. isn't it?" He laughed bitterly. "You command fleets. You rule hundreds of worlds. People kill and die at your word. And I'm what? A grease monkey on a backwater planet who fixes broken things for scrap metal." "You're the person who saw me," she said quietly. "The only person in years who looked at me and saw someone worth talking to instead of something to be used or feared, or worshipped." "Your Majesty," the guard interjected urgently, "we need to leave. The consortium will send more assassins, and our intelligence suggests they have sympathizers throughout this sector." Celestine nodded without taking her eyes off Jackson. "Prepare for immediate departure." She took a step toward him. "Come with me." "What?" "Come with me. Back to the Empire. I can give you anything you want. Wealth, position, a workshop that would make this place look like a child's toy. You could be your pet human." The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but he was hurt and angry, and trying to process the revelation that the woman he'd fallen for controlled more power than he could imagine. "Your exotic distraction from the burdens of empire?" She recoiled as if he'd struck her. "Is that really what you think of me?" "I don't know what to think of you. 3 days ago, you were Sela, a mysterious stranger with battle damage and beautiful eyes. Now you're telling me you're an Empress, who could probably buy and sell this entire planet without noticing the expense. How am I supposed to reconcile that? By trusting that the woman who kissed you last night is the same person standing here now." "Your Majesty," the guard pressed. "Please." Celestine closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, Jackson saw the exact moment she put the mask back on. The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the cool composure of someone born to rule. Very well. Her voice was steady, professional, empty of the warmth it had carried for the past 3 days. "Compensation will be provided for the damage to your workshop. The Empire does not forget its debts." She turned to go, then paused at the ruined doorway. "For what it's worth," she said without looking back, "Sela was never a lie. She was just the person I might have been in a different life." And then she was gone, surrounded by her guards, leaving Jackson alone in the wreckage of his workshop and the ruins of the most perfect 3 days of his life. The sound of atmospheric engines filled the air as Imperial shuttles lifted off, carrying her back to her fleet, back to her empire, back to a world so far removed from his that they might as well have been different species entirely. Jackson sat in the smoking ruins of his shop, holding a piece of her armor plating that had been damaged in the fight. The metal was still warm to the touch, and for a moment he could almost pretend she was still there. Almost pretend that Sela had been real. But Empresses didn't fall in love with mechanics. And mechanics didn't get to keep the most powerful woman in the galaxy. 3 weeks passed in a blur of reconstruction and bitter memories. The Imperial compensation had been generous. More than generous. Enough to rebuild his workshop 10 times over, to buy passage to any world in known space, to start a new life anywhere he chose. Instead, he'd used it to upgrade everything, to build the kind of facility he'd only dreamed of. State-of-the-art fabrication units, quantum-level diagnostic equipment, fusion welders that could repair molecular damage. It was a workshop fit for the greatest technician in the sector. It was also empty, hollow, a monument to what might have been. The other residents of Outpost Haven gave him space, recognizing the signs of a man nursing wounds that went deeper than flesh. They'd all heard the stories by now. Garbled accounts of Imperial fleets and mysterious strangers and battles that left plasma scoring on the settlement's outer buildings. But they were frontier folk, and they understood that sometimes the past was better left buried. Jackson threw himself into his work, taking on projects that would have been impossible with his old equipment. He repaired atmospheric processors with the precision of a master craftsman, rebuilt fusion cores that hummed with perfect efficiency, and restored damaged systems to better than new condition. But every night, as the twin suns set and painted the sky in familiar shades of amber and crimson, he found himself staring at the stars and wondering which one might be shining down on an Empress who had once pretended to be named Sela. He was so lost in those thoughts that he almost missed the soft sound of footsteps on the workshop's new, metal flooring. Almost missed the familiar silhouette that appeared in his doorway just after sunset, backlit by the dying light of Kepler-7's binary stars. But he didn't miss the voice that had haunted his dreams for 3 long weeks. "Hello, Jackson." She stood in the doorway like a ghost made flesh, and for a moment Jackson wondered if the loneliness had finally driven him to hallucinations. But no, the way the fading sunlight caught the silver in her hair, the subtle grace of her movements, the violet eyes that had haunted his dreams, it was really her. Celestine. Her real name felt strange on his tongue, formal and distant in a way that Sella had never been. "Just Sella, please." She stepped into the workshop, her eyes taking in the improvements he'd made with the Empire's generous compensation. "I'm not here as an Empress." She looked different without the armor, dressed in simple traveling clothes that did nothing to diminish her natural elegance. The silver markings on her skin seemed dimmer somehow, as if reflecting her subdued mood. There was something almost fragile about her that hadn't been there before, a vulnerability that made his chest ache with familiar longing. "Then why are you here?" he asked, setting down the plasma calibrator he'd been adjusting. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing. "I couldn't stay away." She moved closer, her fingers trailing along the edge of his workbench. "I tried, but I keep thinking about what you said, about things needing to break before they can become what they're supposed to be." "Celestine, I've been Empress for 12 years, she continued as if he hadn't spoken. "Since I was 21. My entire adult life has been duty and responsibility and making decisions that affect billions of lives. And in all that time, I'd never met anyone who made me feel like just a person." Jackson felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "What are you asking me?" "I'm asking for a chance." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "A chance to be the woman I was with you. To find out if what we had was real or just a beautiful dream. And then what? You go back to your empire and I go back to fixing machines on a backwater planet? We pretend this never happened?" "I don't know." The admission seemed to cost her. "For the first time in my life, I don't have a plan. I don't know what tomorrow brings, or next week, or next year. All I know is that I can't stop thinking about the way you looked at me before you knew who I was." Jackson crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, cupping her face in his calloused hands. "You want to know how I look at you? I look at you and see the woman who made coffee at dawn because she knew I'd be working early. I see someone who laughs at my terrible jokes and argues with me about quantum mechanics and falls asleep reading technical manuals because she finds them relaxing. Jackson, I look at you and see someone who's been carrying the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders for so long she's forgotten what it feels like to just exist. And yes, the whole Empress thing scares the hell out of me. But not because of the power. Because I'm terrified of how much I care about you." Tears spilled over then, tracking silver down her cheeks. "I care about you too. More than I should. More than is safe for either of us." He kissed her then, soft and desperate, tasting salt and sorrow and something that might have been hope. She melted against him, her arms wrapping around his neck as if she were drowning and he was her only anchor to the surface. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she pressed her forehead against his. "There's something else," she whispered, "something I haven't told you." "What?" "The assassination attempt. It wasn't random. There's a civil war brewing in the Empire. Half the noble houses think I'm too soft, too willing to negotiate with the outer colonies instead of simply crushing them. The other half think I'm too harsh, too quick to use military force when diplomacy would serve better." Jackson pulled back to look at her. "And you're caught in the middle." "I've been caught in the middle my entire reign. But it's getting worse. The consortium was just the beginning. There will be more attempts, more enemies, more people who want to use me or destroy me or both." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying that being with me means being in constant danger. It means looking over your shoulder for the rest of your life. It means never knowing if today is the day someone decides to hurt you to get to me." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, processing the weight of what she was offering. A life of luxury, yes, but also a life of constant threat. A love that could literally reshape the galaxy, but at the cost of everything he'd ever known. You know what I think? He said finally. What? I think you're giving me a choice between a safe, boring life and a dangerous, extraordinary one. And I think you already know which one I'm going to pick. She searched his face, looking for doubt or fear or second thoughts. You could die. I could die tomorrow from a plasma leak in my shop. I could die next week when some drunk spacer crashes into the settlement. Hell, I could die tonight from food poisoning at Henrik's boarding house. He smiled, the first genuine smile he'd managed since she'd left. At least this way, I'd die doing something that matters. What we're talking about, it wouldn't be easy. The court politics alone would eat you alive. You'd have to learn languages, protocols, how to navigate. A world where a misplaced word could start a war. Good thing I'm a quick study. And the cultural differences. Sella. He stopped her with a gentle finger to her lips. I've spent my entire adult life adapting to whatever situation I found myself in. I've learned to repair technology I'd never seen before, to work with alien metals and exotic energy sources, to survive on planets that weren't meant for human habitation. You think I can't learn to navigate imperial politics? That's different. That's just technical knowledge. No, it's not. It's all about understanding patterns, finding the logic that makes everything work together. Whether it's a fusion reactor or a royal court, the principles are the same. Study the system, find the weak points, figure out how to make it run better. Despite everything, she laughed. You make it sound so simple. Most things are, once you understand what you're looking at. He grew serious again. But there's one condition. What? I'm not going to be your secret. I'm not going to hide in the shadows while you play Empress. If we do this, we do it honestly. The galaxy gets to know that Empress Celestine Vex is in love with a mechanic from Kepler 7. That could cause problems. Good. Let them be problems we face together instead of problems you face alone. She stared at him for a long moment, and he could see the internal battle playing out behind her eyes. The trained caution of a ruler warring with the desperate hope of a woman who had been alone for far too long. There's a ship waiting, she said finally. Captain Boren and a small crew. They're loyal to me personally, not to the Empire. We could leave tonight. And go where? Anywhere. Everywhere. There are worlds in the Empire that haven't seen their Empress in person for decades. People who've never had a voice in their own governance. We could change that. We? You said you wanted to matter. Help me matter in the right ways. Help me be the kind of ruler my people deserve instead of the kind they fear. Jackson looked around his workshop, at the equipment he'd bought with Imperial credits, at the life he'd built from the ashes of his old one. It was a good life. Comfortable and safe and utterly predictable. It was also empty without her. What about your guards? Your advisors? Won't they object to you running off with a commoner? Probably, but that's their problem, not ours. She stepped closer, her hands resting on his chest. I'm tired of letting other people decide what I can and can't do. Tired of being a symbol instead of a person. If I'm going to rule an empire, I want to do it on my own terms. And if the noble houses rebel, then we'll deal with that when it happens together. And if the military decides they don't like taking orders from someone who's gone native, then we'll remind them that I still command the loyalty of the Imperial fleet, and that my native happens to be the best damn engineer in 3 sectors. He laughed despite himself. You're really going to do this, aren't you? Give up the throne room and the palace for a life of traveling from world to world, fixing problems and making enemies? I'm going to try to be the kind of person who deserves the woman who kissed me in a repair shop on Kepler 7. That woman never left, he said softly. She just got scared for a while. Will you come with me? It wasn't really a question. They both knew what his answer would be. Had known it from the moment she'd stepped through his door 3 weeks ago and turned his world upside down. Yeah, he said simply. Yeah, I'll come with you. The ship was sleek and fast, built for speed rather than comfort. Captain Boren Keth was a grizzled veteran who took one look at Jackson and immediately started making plans for upgrading the vessel's systems. The crew was small but competent, handpicked for their loyalty and their willingness to follow their Empress into whatever came next. As Kepler-7 fell away behind them, Jackson stood at the observation deck beside Celestine, watching the stars wheel past. She'd changed into simple clothes similar to his own, the elaborate robes of state packed away in favor of practical garments that wouldn't draw attention on the frontier worlds they planned to visit. "Any regrets?" she asked, her hand finding his. "Just one." "What's that?" "I never got to finish upgrading the plasma regulators on Henderson's atmospheric processor. He's going to be pissed when he finds out I left without fixing them." She laughed, the sound bright and genuine in the ship's recycled air. "We could always come back. You think? Someday? When we've changed the galaxy a little bit. When we've proven that an Empress and a mechanic can make a difference together. And if we can't, then at least we'll have tried. And we'll have done it together." Jackson squeezed her hand, feeling the familiar calluses on her fingers from their days working side by side in his shop. "You know, for an Empress, you're not bad at this whole romantic declaration thing. I've had a good teacher." "Oh yeah? Who's that?" "Some grease monkey on a backwater planet who taught me that the best way to fix something is to understand what it's supposed to be." "And what are we supposed to be?" She turned to face him fully, her violet eyes bright with possibilities. "I don't know yet, but I'm looking forward to finding out." Outside the observation deck, the galaxy stretched out before them, vast and full of challenges they couldn't yet imagine. There would be battles to fight, alliances to forge, enemies to face, and problems to solve. There would be moments of doubt and nights of fear and days when the weight of responsibility threatened to crush them both. But there would also be mornings when they woke up in each other's arms, afternoons spent working side by side to build something better, and evenings when they could sit together and watch the stars wheel past, knowing that they were exactly where they belonged. The universe was vast and dangerous and full of broken things that needed fixing. But as Jackson had learned long ago, everything could be repaired if you knew how to look at it right. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, you found someone who saw the same patterns you did. Someone who understood that the most important repairs weren't to machines or ships or empires. They were to hearts. And hearts, Jackson had discovered, were the most resilient things in the galaxy. As the ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying them toward whatever tomorrow might bring, Empress Celestine Vex and the mechanic who had stolen her heart settled in for the long journey ahead. The galaxy was about to discover that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't military might or political cunning, or even the advanced technology of 1,000 worlds. It was two people who had found each other across the vast darkness of space and decided that love was worth fighting for. And in the end, that was the most human thing of all.